interest rate needs to come down. Currently too high. Anti-people, anti-business. We have to work on all of them. To me, I know I've taken you through a winding time, a long time today. I will end this speech by assuring that the mandate you have given me is not misplaced. The confidence is there. Hope is back for Nigeria.
Welcome back. Yes, as you've seen there, Professor Magnus Wakol joins us this morning. He's the Executive Chairman, Economic Growth and Development Center. He's a former Chief Economic Advisor to the President and CEO, National Planning Commission. Prof, good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning, Chamberlain. Good to be here.
So,
good morning.
You still Professor of Economics in University of Dallas? Okay, nice. So, just wondering, I mean, before presidents come in and make their statements, giving or having some economic component to their speeches, they usually get a lot of advice from economic teams, don't they? And then that also goes to suggest probably that with those kind of statements, it gives you a typology of what to expect from the economic policy. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you say statement, what statement are we talking about
speech.
Here? Okay, yes.
From the president's speech, for instance.
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, he campaigned. Yeah. He had a manifesto. So I suppose he was speaking from his manifesto, speaking on the basis of the things that they had discussed that they would do when they become president. So I mean, we weren't really surprised, what he had to say. But I think if we want to sort of like deconstruct what he said and break it down and rationalize it, I think that he was on point. I thought that his speech was wonderful, personally. I think that if he can do some of the things that he's talked about and the manner in which he talked about them, I think it would be really good for the country.
Now, the thing is this, I mean, there are several moving parts to get the economy running, because governments try different policies to see how they could get it right. So what makes this particular one, what gives you the impression that this might just be a little different from and get results, perhaps different results or better results from what we've seen previously?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I had followed the president before he became president for some time. And when I was in the government, I had cause to at least interface with him a little bit. And I know that he's a guy committed to rational, proper economic ideas. And so I am not surprised that he comes from the perspective that he's coming. I think that he understands the economy pretty well. And he understands the nature of the world. The problem is how to sell the story to the populace. So his storytelling has to be very good. And I think that because the whole thing is about how you tell the story. And I think that he has started well in trying to say that he's going to be accommodative, that he's going to be working with the people, and he's going to be looking at the economic issues that Nigerians have been talking about. And I believe that he will do just that, especially try to give the economic freedom that we want in the country. We don't really have much economic freedom. For example, you say that people are poor, you say in the Niger Delta or say in Zamfara, but the reason they are poor is because they are alienated from their endowments. I mean, so you tie people's hands from their endowments. They can go and mine the resources that God has given to them, and then you say that they're poor. So we have to find a way that we can cause people to be more powerful in being able to engage the natural resources and the environmental resources that they have. In many societies, you will have, say you have a piece of property, you have rights, you have surface rights, and you also have mineral rights. So there's a way you can do it. So people have a way of exploiting the resources that are available to them. I think that with proper consideration, we will look into this. The government is too fat. The government is not going to be able to do everything. The way we've been looking at stuff is to have a situation where the government goes to me, almost literally confiscates the resources of people, brings to Abuja and tries to synthesize it and then say, okay, this is what comes back to you in allocation. It should not be that way. So hopefully they will look at that. But even like with the fuel subsidy thing, I'm sure that you asked a question or two on that. Well, he's caught between a rock and a hard place because there is no money to continue past June because it's not provided in the budget. But it's going to cause serious problems, as we have seen about the cost. But it probably can be ameliorated if we talk properly to the people. If the story is told well and people are engaged, this could have been done all this time. Unfortunately, we didn't do it. So now he's taxed with the responsibility of having to bring the people together to understand. But sometimes it's hard to understand when you have not eaten. And we're going to face the situation. See, the problem usually is not that you make a change, but that you cause people to be able to adapt to the change. And suddenly, it's like when you raise taxes, because people have already programmed. Households also have their own budget. And they program themselves, through a certain period, let's say a year. Then suddenly somebody comes and disorganizes that. That is disrupted. Then in most cases, they don't have wiggle room. They don't know how to adjust. The problem we're facing now is an adjustment problem. Everybody knows that this cannot continue as it is. And I can tell you that personally, I am not really for complete removal of subsidy. I can say that right away.
Okay.
Because I think that, people say that, well, there's only that the bottom 4%, consumes only 1%. The bottom 20% consumes only 1% of the subsidy or of petrol. Well, that may be true, but there's a transmission mechanism. I mean, you don't expect the poor people in the villages to be lining up their Mercedes-Benz cars to buy fuel. That does not happen. But they depend on the richer people who buy fuel, because those guys have the transportation vehicles, the taxis and all the others that these guys must pay. So while I don't come directly to purchase fuel, but I use their vehicle, for which they have purchased fuel, for which now the fuel price has gone up. And so let's say that say here in Abuja, say you live in Maraba, and your income is $30,000, 30,000 naira. Well,
I like that. Okay. Sounded good.
Well, eventually we'll probably get there one day. But let's say naira. Let's say the income is 30,000 naira.
No, I should also hard.
And they are spending maybe nearly half of that on transportation coming. Obviously, this approach is going to cause, some dislocations for them.
Yeah, but some people have spoken of an equilibrium.
Yeah.
That at some point, I mean, if the transport costs are too high, people cannot afford it.
Yeah.
And the transporters do not find any customers, they will come down to a price that people can afford. An equilibrium of sorts.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. The price is not going to be 700 naira per liter. I mean, this is sort of a knee-jerk reaction that we've seen. I think that in the end, we'll have prices in the 400 naira per liter range. Because you remove, let's say the subsidy per liter now is 200. I think it's somewhere in that vicinity. and let's say the landing cost is 115 or so. So if you do the simple math, it takes you somewhere in the 400 naira range. But you have to have regulation for that to happen. So the government's job is to be sure that there's regulation. I think at the end of the day, it's not going to be as bad as people are saying, but there's going to be an adjustment problem. And there is psychological adjustment that people have to also have. And that's why I believe that the administration will come with a story, with an empathetical story, to try to show to the people that they're with us, that they're with the people. When I listened to the president, I thought that he was empathetic. I thought that he was understanding. Now, when the president said fuel subsidy is gone, I know for a fact that he did not mean that it was gone at the time that he was speaking. I think that he was speaking in a very matter-of-fact, very sort of self-assured way to give confidence to the people that he knows what he's saying. But then he needs his technical people. They should have come right away. That no, he's not saying that he ended today.
They did.
Okay, then that's good.
The NNPCL, we understand, had a press briefing that same Monday, to tell people or to explain that the president did not mean that he was going right away. Yes. But it would seem that the damage was already done, or that distribution, that dissemination of information didn't happen immediately, because by the following morning, of course, people had already besieged the fuel station. And that's still the situation till today. Yeah. But let me take you up on other parts, because you started with broad parts of the speech, and being an economist, I'm sure that there are many parts of this speech that you were looking to. It would seem that almost when the president started to speak about the principles of his administration, the principles that would guide his administration, he seemed rather partial to the economy. Of the 5 cardinal points, at least 2 of them point to the economy. The part that talks about remodeling the economy to bring about growth and development. Yes. He also wants to increase GDP. He wants to create jobs, food security, and an end of extreme poverty. And I know that you've been very concerned about ending poverty for the longest of times. And then looking at the bottom here, at number 5, it says our government will continue to take proactive steps such as championing a credit culture to discourage corruption while strengthening the effectiveness and efficiency of the various anti-corruption agencies. I mean, that's under principles. And if you now look at other aspects of the speech, where he now starts to break down the sections of the economy, you see the broad header, security, the economy, then you see jobs, a separate header, agriculture, a separate header, infrastructure, a separate header, fuel subsidy, a separate header, monetary policy, a separate header. And all of this, one would say, isn't it all tied to the economy? Yeah, they're all tied. They're absolutely all tied. And that's the thing. And I think that he's looking at it holistically. Like I said, I like this speech, listening to him. The problem of the country is a human capital problem. And this is it. I mean, so all those things that you said, in fact, the problem of Africa, the reason Africa is poor is because of our grave human capital deficiency. And if we don't solve that, it doesn't matter what you say, how you write it, we don't have the capability of producing the goods and services that the people of the world want, at a level of complexity and sophistication. Okay, so Nigeria, for example, is the largest economy in Africa, but is not the most complex, is not the most sophisticated, say, compared to South Africa. So it's interesting you say that, human capital development is a, major problem. Yes. That doesn't have a head. I would imagine that would be under a header, a separate header, say maybe education, say maybe human capital development, and then there'll be an explanation. Yes. But it would seem that all of this, I mean, different aspects of it are tied to different headers under the economy. Does it mean that somehow, even while the president wants to improve all of these other aspects, he's missed a fundamental part of it? I hope he has not missed it, because I take it in the context of what he said. What is human capital? Human capital really is the economic and professional potential of a country to produce goods and services. So if he's going to do those things that he's saying, somebody's going to do them.
I mean, he's not going to get aliens from somewhere to do those things. He's expecting human beings to do them. Yeah. And even the security issue. I mean, I heard him say that he wants to look at the whole security issue in terms of the architecture and all of that. So it is people that will do it. So when I say human capital, yes, we talk of human capital as being the stock of knowledge and awareness and the behavior. Of course, that knowledge could be formal education, it could be on-the-job training, it could be experiential knowledge, and all of that coming together. But the purpose of it is to be able to produce the goods and services that the people of the world want, Now, so it's about being more productive. The whole thing about the economy is to be more productive. The reason why the per capita GDP of South Korea today is about 33,000 hours is about 2,000. I mean, 2,200, but let's call it 2,000. Is because when we used to be about the same in the early 60s, is because of human capital differential. And when I say human capital, it's not so much just going to school. There is what I call tax-specific human capital development. So I can go to a village person, and I don't have to give that person a PhD. And within 2 weeks, I can give them the skills that they can use to be more productive. So I like to have people understand that it is not so much the degrees that you have, the certificates that you have, but basically the ability to produce the goods and services people want. Economics and the way economists have to start looking at things is not so much in terms of numbers. Okay, GDP was 2.345. That doesn't mean a damn thing. What we're really concerned about is your ability to produce goods and services. How do we make you be able to do that? That's what the other countries are doing. In China, that's what they're doing. There was a time in the United States when only perhaps less than 20% of the population had a university education, but they were producing goods and services because people were cobblers, people were Mr. Hat, somebody was Mr. This, Mr. Goldsmith. They were producing stuff. We have to be able to produce stuff.
So if I could just ask, I mean, because when we interact with some of these key political office holders behind the scene, they seem to tell us that sometimes when policies are pronounced or made by governments, then they try to take advantage of these policies. They see some politicking being played, and to impede what they really want to do, and as such they cannot genuinely achieve the target for which those policies came up in the first place. So when you say a problem is in Africa is human capital, yes, how much of that can be addressed if probably we played this politics differently and see to the fact that, because the professionals out there may not or will not necessarily pander to your whims and caprices as a politician. Yeah. So they will be professional. They will do what they want to do. Yeah. So it's up to politicians to look at that and say, okay, listen, I'm bringing these people in here just to do the job. Yeah. So if we were to approach certain things from that perspective, how much of success can we get? Yeah, well, in every arrangement, there is what I like to call a principal-agent problem. So the principal has a certain objective or a set of objectives that he or she wants to achieve. Yeah. But then you hire an agent that may have some other set of objectives. And the resolution of this principal agent problem is important. If you're a president, you're a politician, so you've hired staff, you hired technicians, you got to be able to introduce into them, get them imbibe what your issue is about, what your objectives are. Yeah. So the agent has to understand it. And that's why I think that when I talk about human capital development, I'm talking also for politicians, leaders, because I'm thinking in terms of productiveness. If you're a senator, what am I supposed to produce? Somebody has to find a way that they let them understand what he's supposed to produce. If you're a taxi driver, what am I supposed to produce? If you're a farmer, what am I supposed to produce? When the country understands, this is extremely important. That's when I say human capital development. That's what I'm looking at. If you learn something, but you don't produce a darn thing, you don't have any human capital as far as I'm concerned. Because you can't produce stuff. In simple economics, we used to teach in those days that capital is the good that is produced to be used to produce other things. It's the same with human capital. So if you got human capital, what are you producing? If you're not producing stuff, if this table just sits here, doesn't serve the function for sunrise, it is not capital. It's just a piece of junk.
So it's the same with human beings. So when we put a guy there as governor, as president, we should be asking that person, what are you producing? And then so they need to go find the skills to do so. I think that the way I've heard this president talk before he even became president is that he understands that the various units at the various levels of government, what I mean by that is local government, state, or whatever, should have some degree of freedom or degrees of freedom to be able to do their work and not be so terribly constricted and constrained by the federal. So when we allow, for example, say fuel, I mean power, electricity, we should allow what they do at the modular refineries. Okay, we should let people go into modular refineries. We should let people mine their stuff. Give them rights to you see the economy explode if we cause freedoms to happen. So I imagine that this president will look at that. You can't, like I said, you can't go to people with their hands tied behind their back and you say that they are poor. They are not. They are poor because you've restricted them. They don't have freedom. Economic freedom is extremely important. So you combine economic freedom with training at all levels to the politicians. There are some people, I would say, that come into politics but are not exactly very clear themselves what they're supposed to do.
All right, let's bring in our colleagues from Lagos.
Well, thanks, Chamberlain. Prof, it looks like a lot of people have good things to say about the president's economic plan, or at least the expectations. Even the stock market said that much with its response. But there's a saying where I'm from that a good soup costs good money, and all of these plans would only be done in the context of, for example, the budget. And part of the things, in fact, the first thing he said he was going to do was budgetary reform stimulating the economy without engendering inflation will be instituted. We have a 2023 budget of over 21 trillion naira. Well, expenditures, or at least revenue, is meant to be 11 trillion, but the remaining half, about over 10 trillion, will be done through borrowing. It will increase to 12 trillion if we were to continue subsidy up until December, at least according to the estimates. So he already has a budget to work with, but the budget is not looking good, especially because of the deficit and how we need to finance that deficit. So if he says that there will be budgetary reform, we have over 6 months to go this year, and clearly there are lots of expectations. What does the president need to do in that area?
Yeah, well, thank you. But the president has a problem. And that's why, I guess that's why he's president, because he has to be the person to find a way to deal with this. The budget deficit is huge, as you pointed out. Everybody's saying that we are spending 96% of our revenue. So there's not much room there to go get money. But what has to be done has to be done. So I suspect that there will be more borrowing, because, I mean, what's he going to do? I mean, you have to borrow to be able to complete the year doing the things that you're supposed to do. But as I said, going forward, we have to increase our ability to produce more. The insecurity has added to some of the inflation that we see out there when you go to the marketplace. The other inflation that people are coming to see happen because sometimes of insecurity. As we improve on that area and make it easier for people to get their products from the farm to the market, you find that helps to cause prices to come down a little bit. And so basically what you're doing there is you're increasing the ability of farmers to produce. If you look at the growth of agriculture, I can go back any time, probably even 10 years now, and you don't see any time when we consistently, if at all, had up to a 5% growth rate in agriculture. I mean, you can't run a country like this without having significant growth in agriculture. Agriculture accounts for about 25% of GDP, but it is growing very abysmally. So they will have to look at what's happening there. Is it insecurity that's causing the problem? What's happening to our resilience, even to being able to produce? And I think that the problem is that we don't have the skills to produce larger amounts of agricultural goods. So we have to pay attention to that, make sure that you got the foods into the marketplace at affordable prices. And that's what you must do, especially if you're going to raise, if you're going to remove the fuel subsidy. You have to find some place where you cause a decrease in prices, a decrease in transmission of higher prices. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that if you are a farmer and you can't bring enough to the table now, but there's now more security, then you'll be able to bring a lot more, and that will reduce the prices so much that when they remove the subsidy, what could have been a much higher price to the ordinary consumer will not be so anymore, because there would have been some mitigating effect from the fact that we now have better security and we now have increased output coming to the marketplace. But even that can be further improved upon if we train the farmers on how to produce, increase yields, on how to be more efficient, and how to reduce post-harvest waste. So there are a whole number of things, but these things will not be done just from Abuja. These things have to be done at the local government levels. So the president, through the National Economic Council, will have to find a way to talk to the states, and the states also talk. Actually, I believe the president should go directly, in many cases, to local governments. There should be a situation where local governments come and interface with the president, and there's harmony, and they understand how it is that we can produce goods and services. I mean, if I were to keep talking here, all I would be repeating is how do we produce things more efficiently?
Well, let me come in here then.
How do we raise our level of production?
And I think it's important to make that point.
In the world are the countries that can produce the goods and services that the people of the world want.
Indeed. And I think it's important to make that point, honestly, because that looks like our solution lies there, at least a large percentage of it. But, you know, when you talk about extra borrowing, I mean, a lot of people say it's a no-brainer. Some have even spoken in support of borrowing. We've carried on with deficit financing for this long. And if he says there will be budgetary reform and there will be borrowing, on the other hand, you wonder how much of reform would we have anyway if we continue with, you know, deficit financing. And the point has been made that we do not have money. Clearly, we do not have even money to pay for subsidy. We might have to borrow to pay for that subsidy and other forms of consumption. So the point has been made, in addition to that, that the government then needs to tighten its belt. We cannot carry on the way we have been carrying on, in the way that, for example, monies are spent in government circles, you know, all of the usual motorcade, you know, buying luxury items and all of that. So in that area, what do you expect, what do you expect from the president?
Well, what I expect is a lot of jawboning. The president has to speak a lot, and that's why I said the president will have to speak directly to the governors and to local government chairmen. You are absolutely correct. I believe that there's a lot of fat in the government. The motorcades, there's a lot of overhead, excess overhead. And I mean, I see when I was in government, I can just say this right away. I mean, we were driving a Peugeot. I mean, that was the official vehicle. But when I mean, nobody drives a Peugeot now. I mean, not even the PAs drive Peugeots. So we had to find a way to reduce that overhead. There are places where we can cut costs and make things a little easier, you know, for us to run this economy. But the fact of the matter is that you don't have the money. The president does not have. You cannot run an economy. You can't run a household. You can't run any kind of budget if you can't raise revenue. And he's not a magician. There is no way that he can do that right away. So he will have to borrow. That's the only way. He has to borrow. But as he borrows, he has to look for a way that he's ramping up his ability to be more productive. We got to produce more. manufacturing cannot continue to be under 10% of GDP in terms of contribution. Mining, you see, for example, well, luckily Dangote is coming on stream, so that's going to help us quite a bit there. So if you look at the thing sectorally, the only place where we've been seeing good increases is ICT. And now, of course, the president is talking about creating 1 million jobs in the so-called digital economy. But to me, the whole economy is digital economy. I mean, we got to make it so that the farmer can sell stuff. If the farmer can sell stuff by people making payments to the farmer virtually, that's digital economy. If the farmer is having his thing sold or marketed online, that's digital economy. So the digital economy is not just ICT, because some people say, oh, then the ICT area is not just in the ICT area, in manufacturing, in real estate, and whatever. The whole economy is digital. And if we do that, it will increase our ability to produce. It will make us more productive. So, like I said, from listening to the president and looking at some of the things that he has done before, I feel pretty confident. Now, the poverty issue, like my question, of course, area of sensitivity for me. The problem is not that people are just out there begging, looking for food. The problem is that they don't have the capacity to produce. If we have to really find, when you're fighting poverty in today's age, it's not about going to people and distributing money to them. That's not what solves the problem. The problem is how to get people to produce more. And I think that our senators, our members of the House of Representatives, these guys represent constituencies. They need to go back home. That's why they call them representatives. They got to go home and talk with the people and say, how do we increase output? How is it possible that we can produce cars here? Well, I mean, I looked at the fleet the other day, looking at what was happening at the Eagle Square with you guys there, and I didn't see one single innocent vehicle driven by one single government official. Well, Prof, it seems to me that you could invest more in activities like Innocent. Well, Prof, and others like that. And then if you do that, all the governments are buying from, say, Innocent at the federal, state, and local levels. That organization has capacity to produce more, and they create jobs. Like Prof, if you can hear me, on that same issue that you have just raised, my apologies if you can hear me, Prof. Yes, I can. Perhaps one of the major issues here that we've had over time is that of communicating to the people, not just informing them. People will buy in if they feel like, look, this fellow is really thinking about me. He knows what I'm going through, and he can communicate to me. And then I'll be able to understand and take ownership of whatever this fellow is saying to me. I say that against the backdrop of what you mentioned, the other time. You've been in government. You understand how some of these things work. Because the people in the rural communities, for instance, as you said, they have challenges that they are bedeviled with on a daily basis that they have to confront. But who is talking to them? The president made a pronouncement. He's laid out some very wonderful, as you are saying, economic ideas, because they're just ideas as far as I'm concerned. They are not plans yet, because we don't see a roadmap for how they will be executed. For instance, in the agricultural sector, he's talking about creating storage facilities. He's talking about value-added processing and all those things. These things aren't things we are just hearing for the first time. It's getting them done. That's the issue. But getting them done begins from people even understanding and accepting that indeed these things are possible and can be done. So speak to those two issues. One of them you raised earlier, which is that of capacity to get some of these things done. Do we have the capacity in country, or are there things that we need to import? And then for the people who have the capacity, do they understand what is expected of them enough to say, this is for the nation, not just for my daily bread? Yeah, absolutely. That's the point. The story. Years back, when I was a forecaster, as an economic forecaster, my big CEOs would tell me that it is not the forecast that matters, but it's the story of the forecast. I got to be able to explain, I got to tell the story on this forecast. And you're absolutely right. So you talked about communication. So the president, as well as his, of course, his technical advisors, will have to find a way that they can communicate this to the whole nation. But that's the reason why, and I mentioned this before, we have the National Assembly. Those guys there are representatives of the people. So that's the first set of people to talk to. So we need to, I'm sure that he will do it. He goes and talks to the people at the National Assembly, says, this is what we want to do. You go home now to your people that you represent, and you cause them to understand these are the constraints that we have. We don't, our revenue, I mean, the spending to revenue ratio is nearly 100%. We don't have any more room. So we have difficulty building roads, constructing infrastructure, which we need, cause the economy to move forward. So that means we need to be more productive. We need to broaden the tax base. We need to get many more things that we can tax, not necessarily raising taxes. So if that message is communicated to the people, and the people have to see where they have a stake in the thing. Where they have a stake is that their incomes are going to rise. Nobody's going to be interested if they don't see how their incomes, how their well-being is increased. And I think their well-being is increased when they are producing. One reason why people feel invisible, they say poor people, what makes them poor is because they are invisible. They are not doing anything. Nobody sees them participating. So we got to increase the ability of the people to be visible, to be counted, to be seen, and they will work with you. When you recognize somebody and you say, I know that you have potential, how do we bring training to you? So let's just say, so it's about training. Oh. The local governments have to understand and say, how do we train our people? What areas do we have expertise? Where do we have comparative advantages? Where are our endowments? I often ask people, what's that in your hand? What's that? Start with that thing that you have in your hand. Every society, every community, every individual has something in their hand that they can work with. Let's illuminate that for them so they can see how they can develop.
This is quite elaborate, and I think it's something to jaw on for those who consider it important. But there is something that seems rare in our culture, in our country, perhaps even on the continent, but which some Asian countries have said to have adopted, and it has worked for them. Korea, China, and a number of other countries like that. It's called the elite consensus. How do you see that working, where the elites come together and say, this is the direction the nation needs to go, not just for our own profitability, but for the nation? So the elites need to sit down and say, this is the way these things the nation needs to go, irrespective of political leanings or business leanings or personal interests, but of national interests. Do you see that happening? If you do, how?
Well, yeah, well, you need whatever that consensus is, whether it's elite or broad-based, because I generally typically prefer a more broad-based consensus. Because we already have the elite consensus in the state assemblies and the National Assembly, and with their liaison with the president. So what we want to see is how you engage the multitudes that are out there. There is a thing that I call poverty stress these days, and so oftentimes people are looking at those who are poor, but they are not looking at those who are afraid of poverty, because poverty is staring them in the face or standing right by them. And most Nigerians are in that predicament. And so these guys need to be, again, a little bit more productive, and these guys have to be able to talk to their representatives. The reason we have government is for the people. I think sometimes we get enthralled by the trappings of government and all the paraphernalia of stuff, and we forget that what we are doing is about the people. If there are no people in the country, then the country does not exist. Then we have nothing to work for. When we say we don't have electricity, electricity for who? Electricity for the people to do what? Just to pick needles from a haystack? No, it's for them to be able to produce stuff. So this is the one message message that I want to emphatically make is that we got to find ways to invest in the people, invest in them to do what they be able to produce. The countries that are succeeding are producing stuff. You go, they produce semiconductors. I'm not even saying we should get to that point yet. They produce airplanes, they produce TVs, they produce all these kinds of things. So we got to check community by community and say, can we produce snails that we can export overseas? Can we produce starch? Every community has to be able to find something that they produce. That's what the Chinese are doing. The Chinese have worked their poverty rate to well under 3% from 90-something% just about 30 years ago. It can be done. So the way to end these problems is to cause people to be able to produce. If you want, electricity can be provided, I think. We can containerize the gas that we're flaring now today. We take that gas we're flaring and we containerize it and we truck it all over the country. We will create thousands of jobs. We have turbines in communities. If we're waiting for the day that we continue to have one national grid, one transmission mechanism, everybody has to dump something on it, it would take decades. And we might still not succeed. So we have to have what I usually call, it's sort of like a GSM model. We have mass. So in every community, you have a gas turbine. We have a lot of gas in Nigeria. So we take that gas, put it in a container like we do the ones we used to cook in our houses, and we take it to neighborhoods, and they produce power cheaply. And we have electricity. We could also harness energy from the sun. We have an abundance of sunlight. So we can use that. We can get into the sea. Eventually, I hear that we're soon going to be using hydrogen to power. Most countries, within the next 5-10 years, they'll have just hydrogen, which is just from water. They take water and they break it down, get hydrogen out, and they power it. So we got to look in those directions too.
Well, clearly, quite a number of things he needs to juggle and get the economy going. But I'm hoping that from this speech, he's not neglecting power. So it looks as though that they'll have a major say in how the power sector plays itself out, because that will be a major basis upon which all of this production can thrive. We do thank you for coming on, Professor Magnus Kwakol, Executive Chairman, Economic Growth and Development Center. He's also former Chief Economic Advisor to the President. We will be back in just a moment. It's talking about the fuel subsidy back and forth. Stay with us.